The host, Alice Cronin, a seasoned TCM journalist, opened the show with a warm smile. The studio smelled of freshly brewed coffee mixed with a faint hint of wood polish from the paneled walls. Outside the window, the lights of Times Square twinkled in the dusk. The audience, mostly older folks who grew up on Scorsese's films and The Sopranos, waited eagerly. "Gentlemen, welcome to our studio," Alice began, her voice soft but confident. "Marty, Tony, it's an honor. Tell us, how do you assess the impact of The Sopranos on modern cinema?" Scorsese, in his signature dark suit, adjusted his glasses and smiled. His face, etched with wrinkles, radiated calm wisdom. "The Sopranos was a revolution," he started. "David Chase created something that made us look at antiheroes in a new way. It's not just a mob show, it's an exploration of the human soul, morality, family. I've always said cinema must be honest, and The Sopranos is honesty in every frame." Tony Sirico, dressed in a loud shirt with an open collar reminiscent of Paulie, snorted. His gray hair was slicked back, but his eyes burned with discontent. "Honesty, Marty?" His voice was low, with a slight Brooklyn accent. "Let's get real. You always loved those highfalutin words, but where was your honesty when you refused to work with us because we were what to TV?" Silence fell. Alice froze, clutching her tablet. The audience hushed, broken only by a faint cough. Scorsese raised an eyebrow, but kept his composure. "Tony, I never said anything like that," he replied calmly. "My point has always been that film and television are different mediums, each with its own rules." "Rules?" Sirico leaned back, his voice rising. "You called us lesser because we did a series, not your 3-hour gangster epics. I heard what you said in the 90s, Marty. Don't play dumb." Alice tried to intervene. "Gentlemen, let's get back to The Sopranos." But Sirico cut her off. "No, Alice, I want him to answer. We're live. Tell us, Mr. Scorsese, why didn't you ever respect us TV guys? We worked just as hard as your actors. We bled for that show." Scorsese sighed, his fingers lightly tapping the table. He looked directly at Sirico, a spark in his eyes. "Tony, you've misunderstood my words. I respect The Sopranos. I respect your work. But you're making this personal when it's not. Let's talk like adults, no grudges." The audience murmured. Cameras zoomed in on both men's faces. The tension in the studio was palpable, as if the air had thickened with unspoken grievances. Alice, sensing the broadcast slipping out of control, tried to pivot. "Tony, tell us how you prepared for Paulie. Your character became iconic." Sirico, still seething, answered without breaking eye contact with Scorsese. "You know, Alice, I didn't play Paulie. I was Paulie. I grew up in Brooklyn, saw those guys, lived with them. That's not acting, that's life. And Marty here thinks his films are the only truth about the mob. Well, I'll tell you, Marty, your gangsters are fantasy. We showed the real thing." Scorsese leaned forward, his voice steady but laced with steel. "Tony, you're accusing me of romanticizing the mob? My films aren't glorification, they're tragedies. I show how these people destroy themselves and everyone around them. If you think The Sopranos is the only truth, you're missing the bigger picture." Sirico slammed his fist on the table, making the microphone hum. "Bigger picture? You always say that, Marty. You think you're above us because you make big cinema. But guess what? People love The Sopranos more than your films because we were closer to them. We were in their homes every week." The audience erupted in applause. Some whistled, cheering Sirico on. Alice, visibly flustered, glanced at the director through her earpiece, who signaled to keep going. Scorsese raised a hand, asking for quiet. His face remained calm, but his eyes burned. "Tony, I'm not competing with you or The Sopranos. I'm glad the show touched so many people. But you're turning this into a personal feud. Why? If you've got an issue with me, say it straight. No need to hide behind words." Sirico laughed, but it was bitter. "Issue? Oh, I've got an issue. You never gave us the respect we deserved. I remember you brushing off David Chase at a party in the 2000s. You said series were soap operas for men. Don't deny it, I was there. Scorsese froze. His face grew serious. If I said something like that, I was wrong, he said quietly. But, Tony, that was 20 years ago. You've been holding this grudge all this time. Maybe I have, Sirico muttered, crossing his arms. Because guys like you always look down on us. Alice, sensing the broadcast could derail completely, tried to salvage it. Gentlemen, I see there's tension here. But let's think about your shared legacy. You've both created stories that change culture. Can you find common ground? Scorsese nodded, his voice softening. Alice, I'm open to talking. Tony, if I ever offended you or your colleagues, I apologize. I'm not perfect, but I believe we both wanted to tell true stories. My films are one path, The Sopranos is another. Neither is better or worse. Sirico stayed silent, his fingers gripping the armrests. The audience waited, breathless. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but still tense. You know, Marty, I respected you. Your films inspired me when I started. But when I heard you dismiss us, it hurt. Because we gave everything. Scorsese nodded, his eyes warmer. I hear you, Tony. And I'm grateful for your honesty. Let's do this. After the show, we'll sit down, have coffee, and talk. No cameras, no audience. Just two guys from New York who love telling stories. Sirico looked at him, his face softening. He nodded slowly. All right, Marty. But you're paying for the coffee. The audience laughed, the tension in the studio dissolving. Alice exhaled in relief. The broadcast ended with applause. Scorsese and Sirico shook hands, and though the tension hadn't fully dissipated, there was a sense that a first step toward reconciliation had been made. Backstage, they exchanged a few words, and Sirico even smiled when Scorsese recalled an old anecdote about shooting Goodfellas. For viewers at home, especially those over 55, the broadcast was more than a show. It was a reflection of real life. Conflicts, grudges, but also the possibility of finding common ground through dialogue. Many saw Scorsese as a symbol of the old guard and Sirico as the voice of those fighting for recognition. Their clash wasn't just entertainment, but a reminder that even the fiercest arguments could have room for understanding. Did they meet for that coffee? Did they reconcile? That remained off camera. But that evening in New York, two legendary men showed that even the deepest grudges could begin to heal with a willingness to listen. Alice Cronin, the host, poked her head in, clutching her tablet. Gentlemen, that was unforgettable, she said with a cautious smile. Social media's exploding. People want to know if you're really going for that coffee. Scorsese smiled, his eyes crinkling. Alice, if Tony doesn't back out, I know a place nearby. A little cafe on Columbus Avenue that makes espresso like they do in Italy. Sirico snorted, but there was less venom in it this time. Italy, huh? You know, Marty, I grew up on real espresso in Brooklyn. Not sure your Manhattan coffee's gonna cut it. Alice laughed, sensing the ice beginning to thaw. Well, keep us posted. And, Tony, thanks for not smashing the table. I was worried. She left, leaving them alone. Scorsese sipped his tea and looked at Sirico. So, Tony, coffee or no? Sirico turned, his face serious but less guarded. You know, Marty, I wasn't kidding out there. It really hurt that that you didn't see us as equals. The Sopranos wasn't just a show. We poured our hearts into it like it was our last shot. Scorsese nodded, his fingers lightly gripping the cup. I hear you, Tony. And I meant it about the apology. If my words ever hurt you or David, it wasn't intentional. But let me tell you something. I watched The Sopranos. Not every episode, but I saw what you did. And it was real. You were real. Sirico raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. You watched? And you didn't call us a soap opera behind closed doors. Scorsese chuckled, a low, raspy sound. Maybe I grumbled something about series in the 90s. I was younger, stubborn, thought film was the only way. But time puts things in perspective. Tony, you think I don't respect you? I do. I'm just not the guy who throws compliments around easily. Sirico sat across from him, his shoulders relaxing. All right, Marty. Let's be straight. Why didn't you ever work with any of us? Me, Jimmy Gandolfini, Edie Falco, we could have brought something to your films. But you always went with De Niro, Pesci, Keitel. Why? Scorsese set his tea down and leaned forward. His voice grew quieter but more intense. It's not about you, Tony. It's about me. I work with people I've known for decades because it's safe. I know they'll deliver what I need. But that doesn't mean I didn't see your talent. Hell, your scene in The Sopranos where Paulie goes to the woods with Chris, that's a masterpiece. I remember thinking, this guy steals every scene. Sirico blinked, his face softening. You remember that scene? Of course, Scorsese said. And you know what? If I were shooting something now, I'd call you. But you'd probably say I take too long on set. They both laughed, and this time it was genuine. The tension that had hummed between them began to dissipate, like smoke clearing. An hour later, they sat in a cozy cafe, La Colombe, on Columbus Avenue. The place was warm, wooden tables, the smell of freshly ground beans, soft jazz barely audible from the speakers. Outside, the lights of the evening city flickered, and passers-by hurried home, bundled in coats. Scorsese ordered an espresso, Sirico a cappuccino with double sugar. You drink that like my Uncle Vito, Scorsese teased, pointing at the sugar. And you drink like some European intellectual, Sirico shot back, stirring his coffee. Look, Marty, I appreciate you doing this. Not everyone would have taken my jabs on live TV. Scorsese shrugged. I grew up in Little Italy, Tony. Things got settled with words. Sometimes shouting, but always words. You said what you thought. I respect that. Sirico took a sip and sighed. You know, I didn't mean to air all that in public. But when I saw you out there, with your calm wisdom, something snapped. I thought, why didn't this guy ever give us a chance? I get it, Scorsese said. And I don't hold it against you. But tell me, Tony, what do you want? Now, in 2024, you didn't hold that grudge for nothing. Sirico paused, his fingers tapping the cup finally. He spoke, his voice quieter, almost vulnerable. I want people to remember what we did with The Sopranos. Not just me, but all of us, David, Jimmy, Edie, everyone. And I want guys like you to acknowledge that we weren't just TV. We changed the game, Marty. I want that respected. Scorsese nodded, his eyes locked on Sirico's. You've got my respect, Tony. And I'll do something. I'm working on a new project, a documentary about the evolution of gangster stories. I'll include The Sopranos, and I want you to be part of it. Tell your story. About Paulie, about Brooklyn, about everything. Sirico raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. You serious? As a heart attack, Scorsese said with a smile. The next day, New York tabloids exploded with headlines. Scorsese versus Sirico. Battle of the Titans live. The broadcast clip racked up millions of views on YouTube. Older viewers who tuned into TCM shared their thoughts over coffee and family dinners. For them, it wasn't just a show but a moment that mirrored their own conflicts with coworkers, friends, family, where grudges lingered but could dissolve with one honest conversation. Sirico returned to his Brooklyn home, where his neighbors, old Italians, teased. Tony, you almost decked Scorsese on live TV. But he just smiled, thinking of their coffee. Scorsese, back in his Manhattan office, reviewed notes for the documentary. He added a new line, interview with Tony Sirico, the truth about Paulie. Would their collaboration come to fruition? Could they fully close old wounds? That was up to them. But that evening in the cafe marked a small step, not toward full reconciliation, but toward understanding. And in New York, a city where new stories are born every day, that was enough to feel hope. What began as a public feud had become something more, a dialogue that not only reconciled two legends, but reminded the world why their stories, whether on film or television, remained so vital to generations. The theater's lobby buzzed with excitement. The smell of popcorn mingled with the faint scent of expensive perfume from the guests, critics, actors, directors, and fans, many over 55. Posters lined the walls, stills from The Godfather, Goodfellas, The Sopranos. One stood out, a black and white photo of Tony Sirico as Paulie Walnuts, captioned, "Truth in the eyes of the one who lived the story." Scorsese stood near the entrance to the screening room, dressed in a dark blazer and tie. His face, as always, was calm, but his eyes sparkled with the energy of a premiere. Beside him was Sirico, in a loud shirt with an open collar, a faint smile betraying pride. They exchanged a few words before entering, and there was no trace of the tension that had crackled between them 6 months ago. "You ready, Tony?" Scorsese asked, adjusting his glasses. "Ready? Marty, I was born ready," Sirico replied, winking. "But if this film of yours is boring, I'm walking out." Scorsese laughed, his raspy chuckle echoing in the lobby. "If you walk out, I'll say you're scared of the truth." They entered the screening room to applause. The audience, a mix of New York cinephiles, old friends from Little Italy, and young directors who saw Scorsese as a god, waited eagerly. Alice Cronin, the host of that fateful broadcast, sat in the front row. She'd written a Vanity Fair piece about their feud and reconciliation, calling it the most honest moment on television in years. The film opened with archival footage, black and white shots of 1920s New York, the sound of honking cars and distant crowd noise. Scorsese's voiceover narrated how gangster stories became a warped mirror of the American dream. The camera cut to clips from The Godfather, Once Upon a Time in America, and then a pivotal scene from The Sopranos, with Paulie Walnuts, played by Sirico, standing in a snowy forest, gun in hand. When Sirico himself appeared on screen, sitting in a studio, his voice filled the room. He spoke about his Brooklyn childhood, street gangs, and how he landed The Sopranos after years of struggle. "I didn't play Paulie," he said, looking straight into the camera. "I knew Paulie. I saw guys like him every day. And when I heard people call our show a soap opera, I thought, you don't get it. This was our life." The audience listened, rapt. Many, especially the older viewers, nodded, recalling their own lives in Italian-American neighborhoods where everyone knew a Paulie. Scorsese, sitting in the theater, watched with a faint smile. He knew this moment belonged to Tony. The film ended with a montage, scenes from Goodfellas blended with The Sopranos, and Scorsese's voice concluded. "Film and television aren't a competition. They're a conversation. We're all telling one story, about people searching for meaning, even as their world crumbles." As the screen faded to black, the theater erupted in applause. People stood, whistled, some wiped tears. For many, this wasn't just a movie, but a return to their youth, a time when The Sopranos gathered families around TVs, and Scorsese's films made them ponder morality and choice. After the screening, Scorsese and Sirico took the stage for a candid, moderated by Alice Cronin. The room hummed with emotion, hands shooting up. The first question came from an older man in a tweed jacket. "Mr. Sirico, after your TCM broadcast, I thought you and Mr. Scorsese would never get along. What changed?" Sirico grinned, his eyes twinkling. "You know, I was mad. For a long time. But Marty, he knows how to listen." We sat down for coffee, talked it out. And I realized he's not the stuck-up guy I thought. He's just a kid from Little Italy, like me. Scorsese nodded, his voice quiet but sincere. Tony gave me a chance to explain. And I realized that sometimes we directors can seem aloof. But the truth is, we all want the same thing, to tell stories that hit home. Tony reminded me why I started doing this. The next question came from a young woman, a film school student. "Mr. Scorsese, do you plan to work with Mr. Sirico again?" Scorsese looked at Tony and smiled. "If Tony agrees to star in my next film, I've got a role for him already. but he'll probably say I take too long to shoot." The audience laughed, and Sirico raised his hands, as if surrendering. "Marty, if you're buying the coffee, I'll think about it." After the premiere, Scorsese and Sirico headed to a nearby bar, an old Irish pub with scuffed wooden tables and the smell of whiskey. They sat at a corner table, sipping beers and reminiscing about the old days. How Scorsese shot Mean Streets on the same streets where Sirico ran with his buddies. How they both watched The Godfather in theaters and dreamed of their place in the industry. "You know, Tony," Scorsese said, holding his glass, "that broadcast could have driven us apart. But it brought us closer, and I'm glad." Sirico nodded, his face thoughtful. "Me too, Marty. And you know what? I like that people saw us real. Not an actor and a director, but two guys arguing, then making up." They clinked glasses, and in that moment, New York around them felt a little warmer. For the audience, especially those over 55, this story was more than a Hollywood drama. It reminded them that even in a world where grudges and misunderstandings pile up, there's room for dialogue. Scorsese and Sirico didn't become best friends, but they showed that respect and honesty could bridge even the deepest divides. Would they work together on a new project? Would their talks remain just memories over beer? It didn't matter. They left a legacy, not just in cinema, but in showing how a small step toward understanding can change everything. And in New York, a city where new stories are written every day, that was enough to feel euphoria.